Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall or watching movies, she could be found in the woods behind her grandfather's ranch, practicing with the old hunting rifle he had taught her to use when she was just 12 years old. Her grandfather, Roberto Martinez, was a veteran of the Korean War. He had served with distinction and earned several medals for his marksmanship skills. When Sarah showed interest in learning to shoot, he was more than happy to pass on his knowledge. What he discovered was that his granddaughter had a natural talent that exceeded even his own abilities. By the time Sarah turned 18, she could hit a target the size of a quarter from 200 yards away. Her grandfather often joked that she had eyes like a hawk and hands steadier than a surgeon's. But Sarah never bragged about her skills. In fact, most people in her town had no idea how exceptional her shooting abilities really were. Sarah worked at the local diner after graduating high school, saving money for college. She was quiet and friendly, serving coffee and pie to the same customers who had known her since she was a child. Nobody would have guessed that this petite young woman, barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing maybe 120 pounds, could outshoot most men twice her size. The Marine Corps recruiting station was located just 3 blocks from the diner where Sarah worked. Every morning on her way to work, she would pass by and see the Marines in their crisp uniforms. She had always respected the military, especially after hearing her grandfather's stories about his time in service. One particularly busy Friday morning, Sarah was serving breakfast to a table of 4 Marines who were visiting the recruiting station. They were discussing their upcoming training exercises and comparing their shooting scores from the previous week. Sarah couldn't help but overhear their conversation as she refilled their coffee cups. "I scored a 97 out of 100 yesterday," said Sergeant Johnson, a tall man with broad shoulders and a confident smile. "Been shooting since I was 8 years old, and I've never missed getting expert marksman rating." "That's impressive," replied Corporal Davis, stirring sugar into his coffee. "I got a 94 myself. My father taught me to shoot when I was just 6. Been hunting my whole life." The other 2 Marines nodded with respect. Lance Corporal Williams mentioned his score of 92, while Private First Class Thompson seemed slightly embarrassed as he admitted to scoring only 89, which was still considered very good by Marine standards. As Sarah continued her work, she noticed more Marines arriving throughout the morning. Word had apparently spread about some kind of special event happening at the recruiting station. By noon, there were at least 20 Marines gathered, all talking excitedly about something. During her lunch break, Sarah's curiosity got the better of her. She walked over to the recruiting station and politely asked one of the Marines what was happening. "We're having an informal shooting competition this afternoon," explained Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a friendly man in his 30s. "Nothing official, just a chance for the guys to show off their skills and have some fun. We do this a few times a year when we have Marines visiting from different bases." Sarah nodded with interest. "That sounds exciting. Where do you hold the competition?" "There's a shooting range about 10 miles outside of town," Rodriguez replied. "The owner is a former Marine himself, so he lets us use it for free sometimes. We've got everything set up already." As Sarah walked back to the diner, she found herself thinking about the competition. She had never shot with anyone other than her grandfather, and she was curious about how her skills would compare to trained Marines. But she quickly dismissed the idea. There was no way they would let a civilian, especially a young woman, participate in their competition. The afternoon rush at the diner was slower than usual, probably because half the town seemed to be talking about the Marines and their shooting competition. Sarah's manager, Mrs. Peterson, was a kind woman in her 50s who had known Sarah's family for years. "You seem distracted today, honey," Mrs. Peterson observed as Sarah wiped down tables. "Everything all right?" Sarah smiled and nodded. "Just thinking about those Marines and their shooting competition. My grandfather taught me to shoot, and I was wondering how I would do against them." Mrs. Peterson raised an eyebrows. "Your grandfather Roberto? That man could shoot the wings off a fly from 100 yards away. If he taught you, I bet you could hold your own against anyone." "I don't know about that," Sarah said modestly. "They're professionally trained Marines. I'm sure they're much better than me." Mrs. Peterson studied Sarah's face for a moment. "You know what? Why don't you take the rest of the day off? Go see what this competition is all about. Maybe you'll learn something interesting. Sarah protested that she couldn't leave work early. But Mrs. Peterson insisted. Business is slow today anyway, and you've been working extra shifts all month. Go on, get out of here, and have some fun. 30 minutes later, Sarah found herself driving her grandfather's old pickup truck toward the shooting range. She wasn't sure why she was going or what she planned to do when she got there. She just knew she was curious about the competition and wanted to see how good these Marines really were. The shooting range was larger than Sarah had expected. It was a professional facility with multiple lanes and targets at various distances. There were covered shooting positions and safety equipment everywhere. About 25 Marines were gathered around, some shooting, others watching and offering advice or encouragement. Sarah parked at the edge of the lot and walked over to where the Marines were gathered. She could hear the sharp crack of rifle fire and see targets being hit with impressive accuracy. These men were clearly skilled marksmen. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez noticed Sarah approaching and walked over to greet her. Well, hello again. I didn't expect to see you out here. Are you interested in shooting sports? My grandfather taught me when I was younger, Sarah replied. I was curious to see how a real competition works. On. Rodriguez smiled warmly. Well, you're welcome to watch. We're just finishing up the 200-yard targets, then we'll move to 300 yards. After that, we'll probably try some moving targets if there's time. Sarah watched as Marine after Marine took their turns. Most of them scored very well, hitting the center of the target more often than not. She found herself analyzing their techniques, noticing small differences in their stances and breathing patterns. Some of these differences matched things her grandfather had taught her, while others were new techniques she had never seen before. Pretty impressive, right? Said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Sergeant Johnson, the Marine who had scored 97 points that morning. These guys are some of the best shooters in the Corps. They're very good, Sarah agreed. Much better than most people could ever hope to be. Johnson nodded proudly. It takes years of training to reach this level. Natural talent helps, but there's no substitute for professional instruction and constant practice. As they talked, Sarah noticed that several of the Marines were glancing in her direction. She realized that her presence at an all-male military shooting competition was probably unusual. Most of the looks seemed friendly enough, but she could sense that some of the Marines were curious about why a young civilian woman was there. Have you ever shot competitively? Johnson asked. Sarah shook her head. Just for fun with my grandfather. Nothing formal. Well, if you're ever interested in learning more, the Corps is always looking for good people. We have programs for civilians who want to improve their shooting skills. Before Sarah could respond, a loud cheer went up from the group. Lance Corporal Williams had just scored a perfect bullseye from 300 yards, and his fellow Marines were congratulating him enthusiastically. Nice shot, Williams, Rodriguez called out. That's how it's done. Williams beamed with pride as he walked back from the firing line. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. All those hours of practice finally paid off. Sarah watched the celebration with interest. These Marines clearly had a strong sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. They genuinely celebrated each other's successes and offered encouragement when someone didn't perform as well as they had hoped. As the afternoon continued, Sarah found herself becoming more and more fascinated by the competition. The Marines' skills were impressive, but she also noticed that their techniques weren't always perfect. Her grandfather had taught her to spot small flaws in shooting form, and she could see areas where some of these Marines could improve. What do you think of our little competition? Rodriguez asked as he joined Sarah and Johnson. It's very impressive, Sarah replied honestly. Everyone here is clearly very skilled. Most of us have been shooting since we were kids, Rodriguez explained. The Marine Corps takes marksmanship very seriously. Every Marine is expected to be an expert with their rifle. Johnson nodded in agreement. It's one of the things that separates us from other branches of the military. Every Marine is a rifleman, regardless of their job specialty. As the 300-yard competition continued, Sarah noticed that the difficulty was clearly increasing. Even these skilled Marines were having trouble maintaining their accuracy at the longer distance. Only about half of their shots were hitting the center rings of the target. 300 yards is where it starts to get challenging, Johnson explained, noticing Sarah's observation. Wind becomes a much bigger factor, and even tiny mistakes in form get magnified. Do you ever shoot at longer distances? Sarah asked. Sometimes we practice at 400 and 500 yards, Rodriguez replied. But that's really specialized sniper training. Most combat situations happen at much closer ranges. Sarah nodded, though she couldn't help thinking about the times her grandfather had challenged her to hit targets at 400 yards and beyond. She had thought that was normal, but apparently it was more advanced than she had realized. As the afternoon wore on, more Marines took their turns at the 300-yard targets. The scores were noticeably lower than they had been at 200 yards. Even the best shooters were only hitting the center rings about 60% of the time. This is where the men get separated from the boys, Johnson said with a grin as he prepared for his turn. Let's see if I can maintain my reputation. Sarah watched as Johnson took his position. His stance was good, and his breathing technique was proper. He fired 5 shots in careful succession, then walked down to check his target with several other Marines. When they returned, Johnson was shaking his head with a rueful smile. 3 in the center, 2 just outside. Not my best work. That's still excellent shooting, Rodriguez assured him. 300 yards is no joke. As the competition continued, Sarah found herself mentally calculating what she would need to do to hit those targets consistently. The wind was light and fairly steady. The lighting was good. The targets were standard military silhouettes, similar to what her grandfather had taught her to use. She began to feel a strange urge to ask if she could try shooting. The feeling surprised her. Sarah had never been particularly competitive or assertive, but watching these Marines struggle with distances that she knew she could handle was creating an unexpected desire to prove herself. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Sarah said quietly, would it be possible for me to try shooting, just to see how I would do? Rodriguez looked surprised. Well, I don't see why not. Do you have any experience with military rifles? My grandfather taught me on similar weapons, Sarah replied. I understand the safety procedures. Johnson overheard the conversation and walked over. You want to try shooting with us? That's pretty ambitious for a civilian. There was something in Johnson's tone that bothered Sarah. It wasn't exactly condescending, but it carried an assumption that she couldn't possibly compete with trained Marines. Other Marines began to notice the conversation and drifted over to listen. I don't expect to do as well as you, Sarah said diplomatically. I'm just curious to try. It's not as easy as it looks, said Corporal Davis, joining the group. These rifles have a lot more power than what most civilians are used to. The recoil alone can be surprising. Sarah nodded politely, though she was thinking about the powerful hunting rifles she had been shooting for years. I understand. I just want to try. Rodriguez considered for a moment. I suppose there's no harm in it. We'll need to go over safety procedures first, and you'll have to follow all our range rules. Of course, Sarah agreed. Word quickly spread among the Marines that a civilian was going to try shooting. Sarah suddenly found herself the center of attention as 25 Marines gathered around to watch. She could hear quiet conversations and occasional laughter, though nothing seemed mean-spirited. This should be interesting, someone said. Wonder if she's ever even held a real rifle before, another voice added. Sarah tried to ignore the comments and focus on what Rodriguez was telling her about the rifle she would be using. It was an M16, a 4, the standard service rifle for Marines. Rodriguez explained the controls and safety features, then had Sarah demonstrate that she understood how to operate the weapon safely. The targets are at 200 yards to start, Rodriguez explained. Take your time, and don't worry about your score. Just focus on safety and proper technique. Sarah nodded and took her position at the firing line. The rifle felt familiar in her hands, despite being a different model than what she was used to. She adjusted the sights according to her grandfather's teachings and settled into a comfortable shooting position. The Marines had grown quiet, watching with obvious curiosity. Sarah could feel their eyes on her as she lined up her first shot. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger gently. The rifle fired with a sharp crack, and Sarah immediately knew the shot was good. Her grandfather had taught her to feel when a shot was properly executed. She fired 4 more rounds in steady succession, then set the rifle down and waited. "Let's go check the target," Rodriguez said, and the entire group walked down to the 200-yard line. When they reached Sarah's target, there was a moment of stunned silence. All 5 shots were clustered tightly in the center ring, with 3 of them actually touching each other. "Holy cow," someone whispered. Johnson stared at the target with his mouth slightly open. That's really good shooting." Rodriguez examined the target more closely. "This is better than good. This is exceptional. Where did you say you learned to shoot?" "My grandfather taught me," Sarah replied simply. The Marines exchanged glances. Several of them were clearly impressed, while others seemed skeptical, as if they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. "Beginner's luck," suggested Corporal Davis, though his tone indicated he didn't really believe it himself. "Maybe," Rodriguez said diplomatically. "Would you like to try the 300-yard targets?" Sarah looked around at the faces of the Marines surrounding her. She could see mixtures of surprise, respect, and doubt. Part of her wanted to quit while she was ahead and avoid any potential embarrassment, but another part of her, a part that reminded her of her grandfather's quiet confidence, wanted to see how far she could push herself. "I'd like to try," she said. The walk back to the firing line felt different this time. Sarah could sense the change in atmosphere among the Marines. What had started as casual curiosity had transformed into something more serious. These men were beginning to realize that they might be witnessing something unusual. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez handed Sarah the rifle again, but this time his demeanor was more focused. 300 yards is significantly more challenging," he said. "The wind will affect your shots more, and any small errors in your technique will be magnified." Sarah nodded and examined the distant targets. At 300 yards, they appeared much smaller, and she could see the flags along the range moving slightly in the breeze. Her grandfather had taught her to read wind patterns, and she spent a few moments studying the movement of grass and leaves between her position and the targets. "Take your time," Rodriguez advised. "There's no rush." As Sarah settled into her shooting position, she could hear quiet conversations among the Marines. Most of them were discussing her first round of shooting, trying to figure out how a civilian had managed such an impressive group. "Maybe she's been practicing more than she's letting on," suggested Lance Corporal Williams. "Or maybe her grandfather was a better teacher than we thought," replied another Marine. Sarah tried to block out the voices and focus on her breathing. Her grandfather had always emphasized that shooting was as much mental as physical. "The mind must be calm and focused," he used to say. "Doubt and distraction are the enemies of accuracy." She lined up her sights carefully, taking into account the slight wind that was blowing from left to right. The target seemed impossibly small at this distance, but Sarah had been shooting at similar ranges since she was 14 years old. She squeezed the trigger smoothly, felt the rifle recoil against her shoulder, and immediately knew the shot was good. 4 more shots followed in steady succession. Sarah took her time between each shot, reading the wind and adjusting her aim slightly. When she finished, she set the rifle down and looked up to find 25 Marines staring at her with expressions ranging from amazement to disbelief. "Let's go check that target," Rodriguez said, his voice betraying more excitement than he probably intended. The walk to the 300-yard line seemed to take forever. Sarah could feel nervous energy building among the Marines. Several of them were walking faster than usual, eager to see the results. Others hung back, as if they were afraid of what they might find. When they reached the target, the silence was even more profound than before. Sarah's 5 shots were clustered in an area no larger than a silver dollar, all within the highest scoring ring. It was shooting that would have been impressive for any Marine, but it was extraordinary for someone who claimed to be just a casual shooter. "This is impossible," Corporal Davis said, shaking his head. "Nobody shoots like this without years of professional training." "Well, apparently somebody does," Johnson replied, studying the target closely. "Unless this rifle has some kind of magic sight we don't know about." Rodriguez was examining the target with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Miss Martinez, I need to ask you something directly. Have you ever received any kind of formal shooting instruction? Military training? Police academy? Competitive shooting programs? No, sir, Sarah replied honestly. Only what my grandfather taught me. And what exactly did your grandfather teach you? Sarah thought for a moment about how to explain years of patient instruction in the woods behind her grandfather's ranch. He taught me about breathing, sight alignment, trigger control, reading wind conditions, basic marksmanship fundamentals. Basic marksmanship, Johnson repeated with a slight laugh. If this is basic, I'd like to see advanced. The comment drew chuckles from several Marines, but Sarah could sense that the mood was shifting. What had started as friendly curiosity was becoming something more intense. These men took their shooting skills very seriously, and seeing a civilian outperform them was clearly challenging their assumptions. Would you be willing to try the 400-yard targets? Rodriguez asked. Sarah hesitated. 400 yards was entering the realm of what her grandfather had called serious long-range shooting. It required not just good technique, but also a deep understanding of ballistics and environmental factors. She had done it before, but always with her grandfather's guidance and encouragement. I'm not sure I'm ready for that distance, she said diplomatically. Come on, urged Private First Class Thompson. You can't stop now. We need to see how far this goes. Other Marines began voicing similar encouragement, though Sarah detected undertones that made her slightly uncomfortable. Some of them seemed genuinely interested in her abilities, but others appeared to be waiting for her to fail so things could return to normal. The 400-yard targets are really more for specialized training, Rodriguez explained. Most Marines don't shoot at that distance regularly, but some of us do, said a new voice. Sarah turned to see a Marine she hadn't noticed before approaching the group. He was older than most of the others, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. The name tape on his uniform read, Sergeant Major Garcia. Sergeant Major, Rodriguez said, straightening slightly. I didn't realize you were here. I heard there was some interesting shooting going on, Garcia replied, his eyes studying Sarah with professional interest. Thought I'd come take a look. Garcia walked over to examine Sarah's target, taking his time to study the shot grouping. He was clearly experienced in evaluating marksmanship, and his opinion would carry significant weight with the other Marines. This is very impressive shooting, he said finally. Professional level accuracy. Where did you train? She says her grandfather taught her, Johnson explained. Claims she's never had any formal instruction. Garcia raised an eyebrow and looked back at Sarah. Your grandfather must have been quite a marksman himself. He was a Korean War veteran, Sarah replied. He earned several medals for marksmanship. Ah, Garcia nodded with understanding. That explains a lot. Those old-timers knew their business. They had to. Their lives depended on it. The sergeant major's words seemed to ease some of the tension Sarah had been sensing. The other Marines clearly respected his opinion, and his acceptance of her shooting abilities gave them permission to be impressed rather than skeptical. I'd like to see you try the 400-yard targets, Garcia said. If you're willing. Sarah found herself nodding before she had fully decided. There was something about the sergeant major's calm confidence that reminded her of her grandfather. She trusted his judgment about what she could handle. I'll try, she said. The group moved to the 400-yard firing line, and Sarah could sense the anticipation building among the Marines. Word had apparently spread beyond the original group, because several additional Marines had appeared and were watching from a distance. At 400 yards, the targets appeared significantly smaller. Sarah spent several minutes studying the wind conditions, noting how the breeze was affecting the vegetation at different distances. Her grandfather had taught her that long-range shooting required patience and careful observation. The wind is tricky at this distance, Garcia observed, standing beside her. It might be doing different things at different ranges. Sarah nodded, grateful for the advice. She could see what he meant. The wind appeared to be blowing slightly harder at the target end of the range than at the firing line. She settled into her shooting position and began the careful process of lining up her shot. At this distance, even tiny errors would be greatly magnified. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. Patience. Mija. Let the shot come naturally. Force nothing. The first shot felt good as it left the barrel, but Sarah wasn't entirely confident about the wind correction. She waited a moment, studying the target through the rifle scope, then fired again. The second shot felt better. 3 more shots followed, each one carefully planned and executed. When she finished, Sarah realized that she had been holding her breath. The silence among the watching Marines was complete. "Let's go see what we've got," Garcia said calmly. The walk to the 400-yard targets felt like a small eternity. Sarah was beginning to feel the pressure of all the attention she was receiving. Part of her wished she had never asked to shoot in the first place, but another part of her, the part that carried her grandfather's spirit, was proud of how well she was performing. When they reached the target, Garcia was the first to examine it closely. Sarah's heart sank when she saw his expression. The shots were not as tightly grouped as they had been at shorter distances. They were spread across an area about the size of a dinner plate, which she knew was not as good as her previous shooting. "Well," Garcia said slowly, 4 out of 5 shots are in the center ring. The 5th one is just outside, probably due to that tricky wind. Sarah felt a wave of relief. She had been worried that her shooting had fallen off significantly, but apparently it was still quite good by Marine standards. "That's outstanding, shooting at 400 yards, Rodriguez added. "Most of our Marines would be happy with that kind of accuracy." Johnson was examining the target with obvious amazement. "I don't think I could do that well on my best day. How did you know how to adjust for the wind?" "My grandfather taught me to watch the grass and leaves," Sarah explained. "You can see how the wind changes at different distances." "That's advanced technique," Garcia noted with approval. "Your grandfather taught you well." As they walked back from the targets, Sarah noticed that the Marines were treating her differently. The initial skepticism had been replaced by genuine respect. Several of them asked her questions about her shooting techniques, and she found herself explaining lessons her grandfather had taught her years ago. "Have you ever considered joining the military?" Garcia asked as they reached the firing line. Sarah shook her head. "I never really thought about it. I'm planning to go to college next year." "The Marines could pay for your college," Garcia pointed out. "And with shooting skills like yours, you could qualify for some very interesting specialties." Before Sarah could respond, Corporal Davis spoke up. "Sergeant Major, do you think she could handle the 500-yard targets?" Garcia considered the question seriously. 500 yards is really getting into sniper territory. It requires specialized equipment and training, but she's been doing so well," Thompson added. "It would be interesting to see how far she can push it." Sarah found herself caught between conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to quit while she was ahead and avoid the risk of finally failing. But another part of her was curious about her own limits. Her grandfather had always pushed her to try slightly more difficult shots, gradually building her confidence and skill. "I'm willing to try," she heard herself saying. "If you think it's safe." Garcia nodded slowly. "We'll need to make some adjustments to the rifle scope for that distance, and I'll want to check the wind conditions more carefully." As Garcia began making adjustments to the rifle, Sarah noticed that even more Marines had gathered to watch. The word about her shooting had apparently spread throughout the facility, and there were now at least 40 Marines present. Some of them had driven over from the recruiting station just to see what was happening. "No pressure," Johnson said with a grin, noticing Sarah's expression as she looked at the crowd. Sarah laughed nervously. "Right, no pressure at all." Garcia handed her the rifle with the adjusted scope. "The ballistics are different at 500 yards. The bullet will drop significantly more, and wind will have even greater effect. Take your time and don't worry about the result." Sarah nodded and moved to the firing line. 500 yards was the longest distance she had ever attempted to shoot. Her grandfather had talked about shooting at such ranges during his military service, but they had never practiced at distances beyond 400 yards. As she settled into position, Sarah tried to channel everything her grandfather had taught her about long-range shooting. She studied the wind patterns carefully, noting how the vegetation moved at different points along the range. She checked her breathing and made sure her shooting position was as stable as possible. The target appeared incredibly small at 500 yards. Through the rifle scope, it looked like a tiny speck in the distance. Sarah had to remind herself to trust her training and not overthink the shot. She lined up her sights carefully, taking into account both the bullet drop and wind drift. Her grandfather had taught her to visualize the bullet's path to the target, accounting for all the factors that would affect its flight. The first shot surprised her with its recoil. At this distance, even small differences in the rifle's behavior seemed magnified. She waited a moment to let the rifle settle, then prepared for her second shot. By the time she finished firing all 5 rounds, Sarah felt mentally exhausted. Long-range shooting required intense concentration, and the pressure of having so many Marines watching had added to the challenge. "Well," Garcia said as she set the rifle down, "let's go see how you did." The walk to the 500-yard targets felt different from the previous trips. Sarah could sense that this time, even the Marines weren't entirely sure what to expect. 500 yards was a distance that challenged even experienced military marksmen. When they reached the target, Garcia studied it for a long time before saying anything. The other Marines crowded around, trying to see the results for themselves. 3 shots in the center ring, Garcia announced finally. 1 just outside, and 1 that missed the scoring area entirely. Sarah felt a mixture of disappointment and pride. She had hoped to do better, but she also realized that hitting a target at 500 yards, 3 times out of 5 attempts, was probably quite good for someone with no formal training. "That's remarkable shooting," Rodriguez said. "Most Marines would struggle to hit the target at all at that distance." "The conditions weren't ideal," Garcia added. "That wind was tricky, and the light was starting to change. 3 out of 5 hits is outstanding for anyone." As they walked back from the targets, Sarah could hear excited conversations among the Marines. They were discussing her shooting performance with the same intensity they might use to analyze a professional sporting event. "Did you see how steady she held the rifle? Her breathing technique is textbook perfect. That wind reading was spot on for someone with no formal training." Sarah found herself feeling proud of what she had accomplished, but also somewhat overwhelmed by all the attention. She had come to the range simply out of curiosity, never expecting to become the center of a crowd of impressed Marines. "Miss Martinez," Garcia said as they reached the main area of the range, "I want to make you a serious offer. The Marine Corps has programs for exceptional marksmen. With your natural ability and some professional training, you could become one of the finest shooters in the military." Sarah was flattered by the offer, but she also felt uncertain about such a major life change. "I appreciate the offer, Sergeant Major, but I'm not sure the military is right for me." "Think about it," Garcia urged. "You have a rare gift. It would be a shame to waste it." As the afternoon began to wind down, Sarah realized that she had accomplished something that would probably change how she thought about herself. She had always known she was a good shot, but competing successfully against trained Marines had shown her that her abilities were truly exceptional. The Marines began packing up their equipment, but many of them stopped to talk with Sarah before leaving. They asked about her grandfather, her training, and her future plans. Several of them encouraged her to consider military service, while others simply expressed their admiration for her shooting skills. "You really surprised us today," Johnson said as he prepared to leave. "In the best possible way." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "This has been an incredible experience." As the crowd of Marines dispersed, Sarah found herself alone with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Sergeant Major Garcia. "What you did today was truly exceptional," Garcia said. "But I want you to understand something important. Raw talent is wonderful, but it's only the beginning. Professional training could help you reach levels you've never imagined." Sarah nodded, understanding that the sergeant major was offering her more than just military service. He was suggesting a path toward developing her abilities to their full potential. "I'll definitely think about what you've said," she promised. As Sarah drove home that evening, she replayed the day's events in her mind. She had started the morning as a small-town waitress who happened to be good at shooting. She was ending it as someone who had impressed a group of professional Marines with her marksmanship skills. But more than that, she had discovered something about herself that she hadn't fully understood before. She wasn't just good at shooting. She was exceptional. The question now was what she would do with that knowledge. The next morning, Sarah woke up to find her phone buzzing with text messages. Word about her shooting performance had spread through the small town faster than she could have imagined. Her first message was from her coworker at the diner. "Girl, Everyone is talking about what you did yesterday. Mrs. Peterson wants to know everything. Sarah groaned and pulled a pillow over her head. She had hoped to have some time to process what had happened before dealing with questions from half the town. But she should have known better. In a community where everyone knew everyone else's business, news like this traveled at the speed of light. Her grandfather was already awake when she went downstairs for breakfast. Roberto Martinez was sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and newspaper, but Sarah could tell from his expression that he had already heard about yesterday's events. "So," he said without looking up from his paper, "I hear you caused quite a stir at the shooting range." Sarah poured herself coffee and sat down across from him. "How did you already know about that?" Roberto smiled and tapped his phone. "Sergeant Major Garcia called me this morning. Wanted to know more about the young lady who outshot half his Marines." "He called you?" "Apparently he did some research and found out that your old grandfather served in Korea. Wanted to talk to the man who taught you to shoot like that." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth. That you've had a natural gift since you were 12 years old. And that you practice more than most people realize." Roberto set down his newspaper and looked at his granddaughter seriously. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. In all my years of teaching people to shoot, I've never seen anyone with your level of natural ability. What you did yesterday proves that your skills are far beyond what most people can achieve, even with years of training." "It didn't feel like anything special," Sarah said. "I was just applying what you taught me." "That's exactly what made it special," Roberto replied. "You took basic principles and applied them perfectly under pressure, against trained Marines who were probably expecting you to fail." As they talked, Sarah's phone continued to ring. Mrs. Peterson called to ask if she was coming to work. Her high school shooting coach, who had never paid much attention to her before, wanted to know if she was interested in joining a competitive shooting team. Even the local newspaper wanted to interview her about her amazing performance against the Marines. "I think I created a monster," Sarah said, declining another call from someone she barely knew. Roberto laughed. "Fame is a funny thing. Yesterday you were just my granddaughter who happened to be good at shooting. Today you're the local girl who impressed the Marines. People love a good story." "I don't want to be famous," Sarah said. "I just wanted to see how I would do." "Sometimes we don't get to choose how people react to our achievements," Roberto replied wisely. "But you can choose what you do next." That afternoon, Sarah reluctantly went to work at the diner. She had hoped that things would be normal, but she quickly discovered that was impossible. Every customer who came in wanted to hear about her shooting performance. Mrs. Peterson had apparently told everyone who would listen about how proud she was of her young employee. "Sarah, honey," said Mrs. Johnson from the corner booth, "my grandson is in the Marines, and he says it's almost impossible for a civilian to outshoot trained Marines." "How did you learn to do that?" "My grandfather taught me," Sarah replied for what felt like the 100th time that day. "Well, your grandfather must be quite a teacher," Mrs. Johnson continued. "My grandson says the Marines are some of the best shooters in the world." As the day went on, Sarah found herself growing tired of the attention. She appreciated that people were impressed by what she had accomplished. But she wasn't comfortable being the center of so much focus. She had always preferred to keep a low profile. Around 3 o'clock, the bell over the diner door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Sergeant Major Garcia entering. Several customers immediately recognized them from yesterday's shooting competition, and excited conversations began throughout the restaurant. "Miss Martinez," Garcia said as he approached the counter, "could we speak with you privately for a few minutes?" Mrs. Peterson immediately volunteered her office, and Sarah found herself sitting across from 2 Marines who were looking at her with serious expressions. "First," Garcia began, "I want to apologize if our competition yesterday put you in an uncomfortable position. We had no idea that word would spread so quickly through your town." "It's all right," Sarah replied. "I knew it was a small town when I decided to participate." "The reason we're here," Rodriguez continued, "is that we've been discussing your performance yesterday with our commanding officers. Your shooting skills are truly exceptional, and we'd like to make you a formal offer." Garcia leaned forward slightly. "The Marine Corps has a program called the Designated Marksman Course. It's advanced training for Marines who show exceptional shooting ability. We'd like to offer you the opportunity to attend this course. Even as a civilian, Sarah was surprised. Is that normal? Training civilians in military programs? It's unusual, Garcia admitted. But not unheard of. Sometimes we identify individuals with such exceptional natural ability that we want to see how far their skills can be developed. What would this training involve? Sarah asked. Rodriguez pulled out a folder and opened it on the desk. The course is 8 weeks long and covers advanced marksmanship, ballistics, fieldcraft, and precision shooting techniques. You'd be training alongside Marines, who are being prepared for specialized assignments. And after the training? Sarah asked. That would be up to you, Garcia replied. You could choose to enlist in the Marines and pursue a career in marksmanship. Or you could return to civilian life with advanced skills that might open other opportunities. Sarah studied the papers Rodriguez had shown her. The training looked comprehensive and challenging. It was also an opportunity that very few people would ever receive. I need to think about this, she said finally. Of course. Garcia nodded. Take all the time you need. But I want you to understand something important. Natural shooting ability like yours is incredibly rare. Most Marines train for years to reach the level of accuracy you demonstrated yesterday. With proper training, there's no telling how far you could go. After the Marines left, Sarah sat in Mrs. Peterson's office for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. In the space of 2 days, her life had gone from predictable and routine to full of unexpected possibilities. Mrs. Peterson knocked on the door and peeked in. Everything all right, honey? They offered me advanced military training, Sarah said, even though I'm a civilian. Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened. That sounds like quite an honor. It is, Sarah agreed. I'm just not sure what I want to do. That evening, Sarah drove out to her grandfather's ranch to discuss the Marines' offer. She found Roberto in his workshop, cleaning one of his old hunting rifles. It was the same rifle he had used to teach her to shoot all those years ago. Grandfather, she began, the Marines want me to attend their advanced marksmanship school. Roberto looked up from his cleaning. I know. Sergeant Major Garcia called me this afternoon. He wanted to make sure I thought it was a good opportunity for you. What did you tell him? Roberto set down the rifle and turned to face his granddaughter. I told him that the decision was yours to make, but that I thought you should seriously consider it. Sarah was surprised. She had expected her grandfather to be more cautious about such a major change in her life plans. Why do you think I should consider it? She asked. Roberto was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Sarah, when I was in Korea, I served with some of the finest marksmen the military had ever produced. Men who could hit targets that seemed impossible to hit, under conditions that would challenge anyone. What you did yesterday reminded me of those men. He paused and picked up an old photograph from his workbench. It showed a group of soldiers in Korean War uniforms, standing in front of what appeared to be a military shooting range. These were the best shots in our unit, Roberto continued. Most of them had been shooting their whole lives before they joined the military. But even they had to work hard to reach the level of skill that you demonstrated naturally. Sarah studied the photograph. Her grandfather looked young and confident, standing with men who clearly shared a special bond forged by their exceptional abilities. I'm scared, Sarah admitted. Everything is changing so fast. Yesterday, I was just a waitress who was good at shooting. Now people are talking about military careers and advanced training. Roberto nodded with understanding. Fear is natural when faced with big decisions. But you should also consider what might happen if you don't pursue this opportunity. How will you feel in 5 or 10 years if you wonder what you might have achieved? But what about college? What about my plans for a normal life? Who says you can't have both? Roberto asked. The Marines will pay for your education. And after your service, you'd have experiences and skills that would set you apart from other people your age. As they talked, Sarah realized that her grandfather was seeing possibilities that she hadn't fully considered. Military service could be a path to education and experiences that she would never get in civilian life. There's something else to consider, Roberto added. Your shooting ability is a gift. Gifts are meant to be developed and used for good purposes. The military could help you develop your skills to their full potential. But I've never thought of myself as a military person, Sarah said. Neither did I when I was 18, Roberto replied with a smile. But sometimes life takes us in directions we never expected. The question is whether we're brave enough to follow those paths when they appear. That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about everything that had happened. 2 days ago, her biggest concern had been saving enough money for college. Now she was considering a military career and advanced training that could change the course of her entire life. She thought about the Marines she had met at the shooting range. They had been professional, respectful, and genuinely impressed by her abilities. More importantly, they had treated her as an equal once she had proven herself. That kind of respect based on demonstrated competence was something she found appealing. The next morning, Sarah called Sergeant Major Garcia and asked if she could visit a Marine base to learn more about what military life was actually like. Garcia was delighted by her interest and arranged for her to spend a day at the nearest Marine Corps installation. The base visit was an eye-opening experience for Sarah. She observed training exercises, toured facilities, and spoke with Marines in various specialties. What impressed her most was the sense of purpose and professionalism she saw everywhere. The Marine Corps isn't just about shooting, explained Captain Williams, a female officer who had been assigned to show Sarah around. We're about excellence in everything we do: physical fitness, mental toughness, moral courage, and professional competence. Sarah spent time at the base shooting range and was amazed by the advanced equipment and training techniques she observed. The Marines were using technology and methods that were far beyond anything she had experienced with her grandfather. This is what you could be learning, Garcia explained as they watched a precision shooting class. Advanced ballistics, wind reading, range estimation, target identification. Skills that very few people in the world possess. What struck Sarah most was the attitude of the Marines she met. They took genuine pride in their abilities and their service to the country. There was a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves that she found compelling. The hardest part about being a Marine, Captain Williams told her, is living up to the standards we set for ourselves. But it's also the most rewarding part. When you know you're the best at what you do, it changes how you see yourself and how others see you. By the end of the day, Sarah had a much clearer understanding of what military life would involve. It would be challenging and demanding, but it would also provide opportunities for personal and professional development that she couldn't get anywhere else. On the drive home, Sarah called her grandfather to tell him about her day. It was incredible, grandfather. The equipment, the training, the people, everything was so professional and advanced. I could learn things there that I never dreamed were possible. And how do you feel about the idea of joining them? Roberto asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to express what she was feeling. I'm still scared, she said finally, but I'm also excited. I think this might be exactly what I'm supposed to do. Then you have your answer, Roberto replied gently. That evening, Sarah made 2 phone calls. The first was to Sergeant Major Garcia, informing him that she wanted to accept the Marines' offer to attend the designated marksman course. The second call was to her high school guidance counselor, asking for help in understanding how military service could complement her educational goals, rather than replace them. As she hung up the phone after the second call, Sarah realized that she had just made the biggest decision of her life. In a matter of days, she had gone from being a small-town waitress to someone who was preparing for advanced military training. The transformation felt surreal, but it also felt right. For the first time in her life, Sarah was pursuing something that fully challenged her abilities and offered unlimited potential for growth. Her grandfather had been right about one thing. Gifts were meant to be developed and used for good purposes. Sarah was ready to see just how far her gift could take her. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself standing at the entrance to Marine Corps Base Quantico, holding a duffel bag and wondering if she had made the right decision. The 8-week designated marksman course was about to begin, and she was the only civilian among 20 experienced Marines who would be her classmates. Sergeant Major Garcia had warned her that the training would be unlike anything she had experienced before. This isn't recreational shooting, he had explained during their final meeting before she left for Quantico. This is precision marksmanship training designed to prepare Marines for the most challenging shooting situations they might face in combat. The first person Sarah met was Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Hayes, the senior instructor for the course. Hayes was a compact woman in her 30s, with sharp eyes and an air of quiet confidence that reminded Sarah of her grandfather. "You must be Martinez," Hayes said, looking at a clipboard. "I've heard about your shooting performance. Impressive work for someone with no formal training." "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant," Sarah replied, not sure what else to say. Hayes studied Sarah for a moment. "I want you to understand something from the beginning. The fact that you're here as a civilian doesn't mean you'll receive any special treatment. You'll be held to the same standards as every Marine in this course. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant," Sarah answered, trying to project more confidence than she actually felt. "We'll see," Hayes said with a slight smile. "Report to the barracks and get settled. Training begins at 0500 tomorrow." The barracks were unlike anything Sarah had experienced. She was assigned a room with 3 female Marines who were polite but clearly curious about the civilian who had been admitted to their elite training program. Her roommate, Corporal Jennifer Kim, was a sniper from California who had been shooting competitively since high school. "So you're the famous civilian shooter?" Kim said as Sarah unpacked her belongings. "The Marines at my base have been talking about you for weeks." "I'm not sure about famous," Sarah replied. "I just did well at one competition." "One competition where you outshot Marines who have been training for years?" added Lance Corporal Maria Santos from the next bunk. "That's not something that happens every day." The third roommate, Sergeant Lisa Chang, was more reserved but equally interested in Sarah's background. "What made you decide to come here instead of just joining the Marines normally?" she asked. Sarah explained about the opportunity she had been offered and her desire to develop her shooting skills to their full potential. The 3 Marines listened with interest, and Sarah could sense that they were trying to figure out whether she belonged in their elite program. "Well," Kim said finally, "tomorrow we'll all find out what you're really made of." The first day of this course is designed to separate the serious shooters from everyone else. That evening, as Sarah lay in her narrow bunk listening to the unfamiliar sounds of military base life, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. She was about to begin training with Marines who had years of experience and professional instruction. What if her natural ability wasn't enough to keep up with them? The wake-up call came at 0430, and Sarah discovered that military mornings began much earlier than civilian ones. By 0500, she was standing with 19 Marines in the pre-dawn darkness, listening to Gunnery Sergeant Hayes explain what they would be doing for the next 8 weeks. "This course is designed to turn good shooters into precision marksmen," Hayes began. "You will learn advanced techniques for long-range shooting, environmental analysis, target identification, and field craft. Some of you will discover that you have the potential to become truly exceptional shooters. Others will find their limits." Hayes looked directly at Sarah as she continued. "Natural ability will only take you so far. Professional technique, mental discipline, and physical conditioning will determine who succeeds and who fails." The first week of training was a shock to Sarah's system. The physical demands were unlike anything she had experienced. Daily runs, calisthenics, and equipment-carrying exercises left her exhausted. The academic instruction covered ballistics, meteorology, and mathematics at a level of detail that made her head spin. But it was the shooting instruction that truly opened Sarah's eyes to how much she didn't know. On the first day at the range, Hayes had each student shoot a series of targets to establish their baseline abilities. "Martinez," Hayes called after reviewing Sarah's targets. "Step forward." Sarah approached, uncertain whether she was about to be praised or criticized. "Your natural shooting ability is obvious," Hayes said, loud enough for the other students to hear. "But your technique has significant flaws that will limit your progress, unless they're corrected." Sarah felt her face flush with embarrassment. After all the praise she had received from the Marines at the competition, being told her technique was flawed was humbling. "Your shooting stance is inconsistent," Hayes continued. "Your breathing pattern varies between shots. Your trigger control, while naturally good, could be much more precise with proper training." Hayes turned to address the entire class. "This is why we're here. Natural ability is wonderful, but professional technique is what separates good shooters from great ones. Over the next 8 weeks, we're going to break down everything you think you know about shooting and rebuild it properly. The next several weeks were the most challenging of Sarah's life. Hayes and the other instructors systematically analyzed every aspect of her shooting technique and forced her to relearn basic skills she thought she had mastered years ago. "Forget everything your grandfather taught you," Hayes said during one particularly frustrating lesson. "I'm sure he meant well, but civilian shooting and precision military marksmanship are different disciplines." Sarah struggled with the instruction at first. Changing techniques that felt natural was incredibly difficult, and her shooting scores actually got worse before they got better. She watched some of her Marine classmates adapt more quickly to the new methods and began to wonder if she really belonged in the program. Corporal Kim noticed Sarah's frustration one evening as they cleaned their rifles in the barracks. "You're trying too hard," she said. "These instructors know what they're doing. Trust the process." "It's just difficult," Sarah admitted. "I've been shooting the same way for 6 years. Changing everything feels wrong." "I know exactly what you mean," Santos added from across the room. "I had to completely rebuild my shooting stance during sniper school. It was frustrating for weeks, but eventually, it clicked." Sergeant Chang looked up from her rifle maintenance. "The hardest part about advanced training is accepting that there's always more to learn, even when you think you're already good at something." By the 4th week of the course, Sarah's new techniques were beginning to feel more natural. Her shooting scores had not only recovered, but were actually improving beyond her previous levels. More importantly, she was developing consistency that she had never achieved before. "Better," Hayes commented after reviewing Sarah's latest targets. "You're beginning to understand the difference between natural ability and trained precision." The academic instruction was also becoming more relevant as Sarah developed a deeper understanding of the science behind precision shooting. She learned about minute of angle calculations, atmospheric effects on bullet trajectory, and the physics of projectile flight. Concepts that had seemed abstract suddenly became practical tools for improving her accuracy. During the 5th week, the class moved to longer-range shooting exercises. They worked at distances up to 800 yards, using techniques and equipment that were far more sophisticated than anything Sarah had experienced before. "At these distances," explained Staff Sergeant Miller, the long-range instructor, "environmental factors become critical. Wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the earth can affect your shots." Sarah found herself fascinated by the complexity of long-range shooting. It was like solving a mathematical puzzle, where each variable had to be calculated and accounted for. Her natural shooting ability, combined with the professional techniques she was learning, began to produce remarkable results. "Outstanding," Miller said after Sarah completed a particularly challenging exercise. "You've just hit 10 out of 10 targets at 600 yards in variable wind conditions. That's graduate-level performance." The other Marines in the class were beginning to treat Sarah differently. The initial skepticism about the civilian in their midst had been replaced by genuine respect for her rapidly developing skills. "You know," Kim said one evening as they discussed the day's training, "when you first got here, I thought the instructors were making a mistake. But you're turning into one hell of a shooter." "Thanks," Sarah replied. "I couldn't have done it without the help from all of you." "Don't sell yourself short," Santos added. "Natural ability like yours is incredibly rare. The training just helps you use it properly." During the 6th week, the class participated in field exercises that simulated realistic shooting scenarios. They had to identify targets at unknown distances, account for environmental conditions, and make first-round hits under time pressure. Sarah excelled in these exercises, consistently outperforming Marines who had much more experience than she did. Her ability to quickly analyze shooting conditions and make accurate range estimates seemed to be a natural extension of the lessons her grandfather had taught her years ago. "Martinez," Hayes said after one particularly successful exercise, "I want to talk to you about your future options." They walked to a quiet area away from the other students, and Hayes turned to face Sarah with a serious expression. "Your progress in this course has been exceptional," Hayes began. "You've not only mastered the techniques we're teaching, But you've also demonstrated the kind of natural talent that appears maybe once in every 1,000 shooters. Sarah waited, not sure where this conversation was leading. I've been in touch with several specialized units that are always looking for shooters of your caliber, Hayes continued. If you decide to enlist in the Marines, you could have opportunities that most people never even hear about. What kind of opportunities? Sarah asked. Specialized reconnaissance units, counter-sniper teams, precision shooting instructors. Units where your skills would be put to the best possible use and developed even further. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. The possibilities Hayes was describing sounded incredible, but they also represented a level of commitment that she hadn't fully considered before. I need to think about it, Sarah said. Of course, Hayes replied. But don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often. The 7th week of the course introduced urban shooting scenarios and moving target exercises. Sarah found herself consistently scoring higher than most of her Marine classmates, including those who had years more training and experience. During one exercise involving multiple moving targets at varying distances, Sarah achieved a perfect score, while most of the other students struggled to hit even half their targets. Incredible, Miller muttered as he reviewed Sarah's scorecard. I've never seen a student perform like this. The other Marines were equally impressed. Several of them approached Sarah after the exercise to ask about her techniques and mental approach to challenging shots. How do you stay so calm under pressure? Asked Lance Corporal Williams, one of the male Marines in the class. My grandfather taught me that shooting is mostly mental, Sarah explained. If you can stay focused and trust your training, the physical part becomes automatic. That's easier said than done, Williams replied. I've been doing this for 5 years, and I still get nervous during difficult shots. Sergeant Chang nodded in agreement. There's something different about the way you approach shooting. You make it look effortless. As the course entered its final week, Sarah realized how much she had changed since arriving at Quantico. The shy waitress from Texas had been transformed into a confident precision marksman who could hold her own with the best shooters in the Marine Corps. The final examination was a comprehensive test that combined long-range shooting, environmental analysis, target identification, and fieldcraft. Students had to demonstrate not only their shooting skills but also their ability to apply everything they had learned during the course. Sarah approached the final exam with confidence that surprised even her. 8 weeks ago, she would have been nervous about competing with experienced Marines. Now she felt ready to demonstrate just how much she had learned and how far her abilities had developed. The exam began before dawn and continued throughout the day. Sarah moved through various shooting positions and scenarios, applying the techniques and knowledge she had acquired. Each shot felt controlled and deliberate, the result of weeks of intensive training and professional instruction. When the exam concluded that evening, Sarah felt both exhausted and exhilarated. She had pushed her abilities to their limits and discovered capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. The results were announced the next morning during the graduation ceremony. Sarah had achieved the highest score in the class, outperforming Marines with years of experience and previous advanced training. Outstanding achievement, Hayes announced as she presented Sarah with her course completion certificate. You've demonstrated the kind of excellence that represents the very best of what this program can produce. As Sarah stood with her classmates during the graduation ceremony, she reflected on everything that had happened since that day at the shooting range in Texas. She had proven to herself that her natural abilities, when combined with professional training, could achieve remarkable results. But more than that, she had discovered a sense of purpose and belonging that she had never experienced before. The military lifestyle and the pursuit of excellence in marksmanship felt like exactly what she had been meant to do. After the ceremony, Gunnery Sergeant Hayes approached Sarah with a folder of documents. These are enlistment papers, Hayes explained. Several specialized units have requested you specifically. The choice is yours, but I hope you'll seriously consider making this your career. Sarah looked at the papers, then at the Marines who had become her friends and training partners over the past 8 weeks. She thought about her grandfather and the pride he would feel knowing that his granddaughter had not only succeeded in this elite program but had excelled beyond all expectations. Where do I sign? She asked. 2 years after signing her enlistment papers, Sarah Martinez had become something she never could have imagined when she first stepped up to that rifle at the local shooting range. Now, Staff Sergeant Martinez, she was recognized as one of the finest precision marksmen in the entire Marine Corps, and had been assigned to an elite reconnaissance unit that operated in some of the most challenging environments in the world. The transformation had been remarkable. The shy waitress from Texas had developed into a confident professional who commanded respect from Marines throughout the Corps. Her shooting abilities had continued to improve with advanced training and real-world experience. But more importantly, she had proven herself as a leader and teacher. Currently, Sarah was back at Quantico serving as an instructor for the same designated marksman course that had launched her military career. It was a prestigious assignment that reflected both her technical expertise and her ability to train others effectively. "All right, Marines," she called to her current class of 20 students. "Today we're going to work on shooting in variable wind conditions at 400 yards. This is where many shooters discover their limitations." The students, all experienced Marines who had been selected for advanced training, listened attentively. Sarah's reputation had preceded her, and they knew they were learning from someone who had achieved the highest levels of marksmanship excellence. Among her current students was a young Marine named Private First Class Jennifer Walsh, who reminded Sarah of herself when she had first arrived at Quantico. Walsh was clearly talented but lacked the confidence that came with professional training and experience. "Private Walsh," Sarah said after observing the young Marine's shooting position, "step forward for a moment." Walsh approached nervously, probably expecting criticism similar to what Sarah herself had received during her first week of training. "Your natural ability is obvious," Sarah began, unconsciously echoing the words Gunnery Sergeant Hayes had used with her 2 years earlier. "But there are some adjustments we can make to help you achieve more consistent results." Instead of pointing out flaws, however, Sarah took a different approach than her former instructors had used. She had learned that building confidence was just as important as correcting technique. "Show me your shooting position," Sarah instructed. "I want to see what feels natural to you first." As Walsh demonstrated her stance, Sarah made mental notes about what was working well and what could be improved. The young Marine's form was actually quite good for someone with limited formal training. "That's a solid foundation," Sarah said encouragingly. "Now let me show you a small adjustment that will help you handle wind better." Sarah demonstrated a slight modification to Walsh's position that would provide better stability in windy conditions. She was careful to explain not just what to do, but why the change would be effective. "Try it now," Sarah suggested, "and see how it feels." Walsh adjusted her position and fired several rounds. The improvement was immediately noticeable, and her confidence visibly increased with each successful shot. "Outstanding," Sarah said. "You just cut your group size in half." This was the teaching style Sarah had developed based on her own experiences as a student. She remembered how discouraging it had been to have her natural techniques completely dismissed, and she tried to build upon what students already knew, rather than tearing everything down. After the training session ended, Sarah found herself thinking about how far she had come since that day at the Texas shooting range. Her military career had exceeded every expectation she could have had. Following her graduation from the designated marksman course, Sarah had been assigned to 1st Force Reconnaissance Company, an elite unit that specialized in deep reconnaissance and precision shooting. She had deployed overseas twice, participating in operations that she couldn't discuss but which had tested every skill she possessed. During her first deployment, Sarah had been part of a team that provided overwatch for other Marine units operating in hostile territory. Her job was to use her precision shooting skills to protect her fellow Marines and eliminate threats at long range. The first time she had been required to use her skills in a life-or-death situation, Sarah had discovered that all her training had prepared her well. The same focus and calmness that helped her hit targets on the range also allowed her to perform effectively when lives depended on her accuracy. "You have a gift," her team leader, Captain Rodriguez, had told her after one particularly challenging mission. "But more than that, you have the mental toughness to use that gift when it really matters. That's what separates good shooters from great ones." Sarah's performance during her deployments had earned her several commendations and the respect of every Marine she served with. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she could handle the most demanding aspects of military service. When she returned from her second deployment, Sarah had been offered several career options. She could have continued with operational units, pursued specialized sniper training, or moved into instructor roles. The choice to become an instructor had been easy for her. "I want to help other Marines develop their abilities the way mine were developed," she had explained to her commanding officer. "I think I can make a real difference in training the next generation of precision marksmen." That decision had led to her current assignment at Quantico, where she had quickly established herself as one of the most effective instructors in the program. Her combination of technical expertise and teaching ability had made her popular with both students and fellow instructors. But perhaps the most rewarding aspect of her instructor role was the opportunity to identify and develop Marines with exceptional potential, just as her own potential had been recognized years earlier. This afternoon, Sarah had scheduled a meeting with Gunnery Sergeant Hayes, who was now the overall program director. Hayes had requested the meeting to discuss several students who were showing exceptional promise. "How are your current students progressing?" Hayes asked, as they sat in her office. "Very well overall," Sarah replied. "Most of them are meeting or exceeding expectations. Private Walsh in particular is showing remarkable improvement." Hayes nodded and consulted a folder on her desk. "I've been reviewing her scores. Her progress has been impressive. Do you think she has the potential for specialized assignments?" "Absolutely," Sarah said without hesitation. "She reminds me of myself when I first arrived here. Natural ability, combined with strong work ethic and teachable attitude. That's high praise coming from you," Hayes said with a smile. "Your own development has been exceptional. Have you given any thought to your next career move?" Sarah had been expecting this question. As a staff sergeant with a proven track record, she would soon be eligible for promotion and new responsibilities. "I'd like to continue in training roles," Sarah said. "Maybe develop new programs or take on larger responsibilities. I think I've found my calling as an instructor." Hayes leaned back in her chair. "That's interesting, because I have a proposition for you. The Corps is developing a new precision marksmanship program that would combine advanced shooting instruction with leadership training. They're looking for someone to head up the program." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. The opportunity to develop and lead a new training program would be the next logical step in her career progression. "What would this involve?" she asked. "You'd be responsible for designing curriculum, selecting and training instructors, and overseeing the entire program," Hayes explained. "It would be a significant increase in responsibility, but also an opportunity to influence how the Marine Corps trains precision marksmen for years to come." The offer was exactly the kind of challenge Sarah was ready to take on. She had proven herself as a shooter and as an instructor. Now she had the chance to help shape the future of marksmanship training for the entire Corps. "I'm very interested," Sarah said. "When would this begin?" "The program launches in 6 months," Hayes replied. "You'd have time to finish your current teaching assignment and then spend several weeks developing the curriculum and selecting initial staff." After the meeting with Hayes, Sarah drove to a nearby coffee shop to call her grandfather and share the news about her potential new assignment. Roberto Martinez had followed every step of his granddaughter's military career with enormous pride. "Mija," he said when she finished explaining about the new program, "I am so proud of what you have accomplished. You've taken the foundation we built together and developed it beyond anything I could have imagined." "I couldn't have done any of it without what you taught me," Sarah replied. "Every technique I use, every lesson I teach, it all goes back to those afternoons in the woods behind your ranch." Roberto was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember what I told you about gifts needing to be developed and used for good purposes?" Yes, I remember. You have done exactly that. You've taken your natural abilities and developed them to their full potential. But more than that, you're now using those abilities to help others develop their own potential. That's what makes me most proud." As they talked, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. It had all started with a moment of curiosity at a small-town shooting range, where she had decided to see how her skills compared to trained Marines. That decision had led to opportunities she never could have imagined. Military service, advanced training, operational deployments, and now the chance to influence how the Marine Corps trained its marksmen. Each step had built upon the previous one, creating a career path that perfectly matched her abilities and interests. "Grandfather," Sarah said, "I want to ask you something. Do you think I made the right choice when I decided to join the Marines?" "Sarah," Roberto replied firmly, "you have found exactly what you were meant to do. You've developed your abilities to the highest level. You've served your country with distinction. And you're now in a position to help others achieve their potential. What more could anyone ask for?" That evening, Sarah returned to the base and walked to the same shooting range where she had first been tested 2 years earlier. The facility was empty in the evening light, and she stood quietly at the firing line where her military career had effectively begun. She thought about Private Walsh and the other Marines she was currently training. Each of them had their own potential waiting to be developed, their own paths to discover. Her job was to help them find those paths, just as others had helped her find hers. Sarah also thought about all the Marines who had laughed when she first stepped up to the rifle at that small-town competition. None of them had been malicious in their skepticism. They simply hadn't understood what they were about to witness. But their initial reaction had taught her an important lesson about assumptions and expectations. People often underestimated others based on appearances or preconceptions. The young waitress from Texas had looked like an unlikely candidate to outshoot trained Marines. But appearances could be very deceiving. Now, as an instructor and leader, Sarah made sure never to underestimate any of her students. She had learned that exceptional ability could come from the most unexpected places, and that her job was to recognize and develop that ability wherever she found it. The next morning, Sarah submitted her formal acceptance for the new program director position. She was ready for the challenge of building something new while honoring the traditions and standards of Marine Corps marksmanship. As she began planning the curriculum,